Good evening and welcome to the third part of my lecture on assessment procedure on direct taxation. Okay, so I welcome all of you final CA students and those of you who have watched the first two parts can watch this third part. Also, those who have not viewed the earlier lectures can also view it, but you will not get that link which you would establish while understanding any lecture. Okay, so I think in the earlier lecture I covered summary assessment. Now I'm going to cover regular assessment or scrutiny assessment and best judgment assessment. So what do you mean by regular assessment? Regular assessment is a normal assessment with inquiry. Summary assessment was without inquiry and regular assessment is with inquiry. So the sections for regular assessment are 143.2 and 143.3. 143.2 talks about sending a notice uh, to the assessee. Just hold on one second. यहाँ पे रख दो. Yeah, sorry for that. 143.2 talks about sending a notice to the assessee and 143.3 is about passing an order. So obviously before you make any assessment you have to send a notice to the assessee. Can I show you the notes which I have compiled? It's difficult to upload these notes. I mean, unfortunately I have not typed them, I've made them handwritten. It's personally compiled from various sources as I mentioned earlier. So I'll give you a gist of most of the notes, but again I repeat from the early lectures, you cannot avoid reading your practice manual or certain textbooks like Manorana Vinod Gupta. You definitely need in-depth knowledge. So we spoke about summary assessment and I was on scrutiny assessment. Why I was saying you refer the textbook? Because there are many case laws, many amendments which you will need to refer. Like in the earlier lectures I mentioned about the amendment for a salaried individual who is not required to file his return of income. So until you have the BEAR Act or practice panel or some study material, I always recommend the practice panel. It is the best source to study. Okay. So we were talking about regular assessment, 143.2, that is sending a notice, 143.3, passing an order. But when do we initiate a scrutiny assessment? That is when we make an assessment with an inquiry, unlike summary assessment which we make without inquiry. So what do you send to the assessee? What do you mention in the notice? The notice basically specifies the assessee to gather materials and evidence which will be used by the assessing officer to pass an order under 143.3. So what are the materials and evidence which the AO will require? He might require the details of the computation of tax, the proof of tax, etc. All the relevant details have to be furnished. So scrutiny is initiated by assessing officer in order to ensure that the assessee has not understated the income, not underpaid the tax, not claimed excessive loss. There are deductions and there are exemptions. If you claim too many deductions, too many exemptions, so you may claim even deductions and exemptions which you are not entitled to. So this will unduly reduce your income and thereby you are evading taxation. By reducing your income, you pay lesser tax. So the assessing officer will initiate a scrutiny if he has reasons to believe. Please keep the language important in taxation. Not only if the assessing officer feels, the assessing officer must have reasons to believe that the assessee has understated the income, underpaid the tax, claimed excessive loss. And how this scrutiny is initiated is initiated by sending a notice under 143.2 requiring the assessee to attend the office of the assessing officer. So the notice, he asks the assessee to attend the office to produce evidence on which the assessee may rely. Now this notice under 143.2 which is sent by the assessing officer to the assessee must be received by the assessee maximum within 6 months from the end of the year in which the return is filed. So supposing I filed my return by 30th September if I'm a company or a tax audit assessee or a working partner for firm, or if I am just an individual, I belong to other assessees who have to file my return by 31st July. So within 6 months from the end of the year in which return is filed, so 31st March and 6 months from that, that would be around 30th September or 1st October. So if I don't receive my notice till that time, I cannot initiate an assessment. That is a scrutiny assessment or a regular assessment. So to initiate a regular assessment, also called as a scrutiny assessment, that is an assessment with inquiry, you have to send a notice under 143.2. The notice must be received within 6 months from the end of the year in which the return is filed. I hope this part is clear. I am being slow and repetitive. Now, how the scrutiny is completed after calling the assessee and after hearing the assessee. That means providing an opportunity of being heard. There's always a doctrine of natural justice. That means before passing any order, you give the assessee an opportunity of being heard. So after this opportunity is given, the AO shall determine the total income tax of the assessee. Now, if any tax is payable by the assessee, or any refund is due to the assessee, then such factors will be considered, and the if there any refund is due or any demand is due to pay tax, it will be made by passing an assessment order under 143.3. So 143.2 you send the notice, 143.3 you pass an order after giving an opportunity of being heard. Again, 143.2 notice, 143.3 order. So under section 143 subsection 3, the assessment must be complete within 24 months from the end of the assessment year. So this is the previous year 2013-14. Assessment year will be 14-15, and 15-16 will be 1 year from the end of the assessment year. 13-14 previous year, 14-15 assessment year, 15-16 1 year from the end of the assessment year. So within 1 year from the end of the assessment year, if you do not pass your assessment order, the order is invalid. That order will have no meaning or significance. So 143. Now, what is the section which specifies this rule? 153. Section 153 mentions that the assessment under 143.3 must be completed within 24 months or within 1 year from the end of the assessment. So the assessment is completed on the basis of materials gathered by the assessing officer and evidence produced by the assessee. These two parts are very important. Scrutiny can be initiated even after summary assessment, because a summary assessment is as good as no assessment, right? It is an assessment without inquiry. Now coming to best judgment assessment under section 144. Best judgment assessment can be initiated by an assessing officer under section 144 if the assessee has not filed the return of income under 139.1, or has not filed a belated return under 139.4, or has failed to comply with the notice of the assessee under 142.1, or has failed to comply with the requirements of a special audit under 142.2a. So if the assessee makes these 4 violations, that is, he does not file a voluntary return under 139.1, which speaks about filing the return by 30th September or 31st July, or if he fails to respond to the notice given by the assessing officer under 142.1. 142.1 talks about RIE. I mentioned that mnemonic in my earlier lecture. That is, he has to furnish returns to the assessing officer, furnish accounts of maximum 3 years, furnish information to the assessing officer, RAI. So 139.1, 142.1, or if a special audit is called 142.2a, if the assessee defaults in these areas, the assessing officer will make a best judgment assessment. That is like a punishment to the assessee, that you violated the norms. Now we will assess your income based on our best judgment. So here the assessing officer will pass a best judgment assessment based on materials gathered by the assessing and on the judgment of the assessing officer. However, a notice has to be given to the assessee, a show cause notice mentioning reasons, citing reasons from the assessee as to why assessment should not be done on a best judgment basis. So it's like an opportunity of being heard. However, if the assessee has defaulted, that is, a best judgment assessment is called for violation of 142.1, that is, failure to respond to the notice or failure to attend the office of the assessee, then in that case even a show cause notice need not be issued. So for if you violate 142.1, no opportunity of being heard is given, and directly the best judgment assessment will be commenced. Again, under 144 also, under best judgment assessment, the assessment must be completed within 24 months from the end of the year in which the assessment is completed. So then 24 months from the end of the assessment year, if the order is not passed, it is invalid. Again, 153. 153 mentions assessment under 144 should be completed. The order should be passed within 24 months from the end of the assessment year. Now, let's make a simple comparison: summary assessment, regular assessment, best judgment assessment. What are the differences between the three? Summary assessment talks about an assessment without inquiry. Regular assessment or a scrutiny assessment is an assessment with inquiry. Best judgment assessment is an assessment again with inquiry. Section for summary assessment was 143.1. Regular assessment is 143.2 and 3, and best judgment assessment is 144. So the simple way to compare them is this mnemonic which I've created: IRBI. I is inquiry, R is reasons, and B is basis, and I is intimation. So inquiry, reasons, basis, intimation. Inquiry for summary assessment, no inquiry is required. For regular assessment, inquiry is required. For best judgment assessment, inquiry is required. Then reasons. Summary assessment can be filed on the basis of a return, and regular or scrutiny assessment has to be filed on the basis of return, on the basis of materials gathered by the assessing officer, and on the basis of evidence collected by the assessee and the assessing officer. Again, reasons for the best judgment assessment is materials gathered by the assessing officer and his judgment, because the assessee has concealed his income. So IR, that is inquiry reasons. Now B, basis. IRBI. B is basis. Basis means is the same thing as reasons. I've mentioned on what basis he can file the return. Same as above. That is materials gathered by the assessing officer, evidence collected, and so on. And I is intimation. So intimation has to be sent under summary assessment. The intimation must be received within 6 months from the end of the year in which return is filed for a summary assessment. Intimation should be, for regular assessment, you have to first send a show cause notice. Okay, and the order must be passed within 24 months from the end of the assessment year. That is 143.3. For best judgment assessment, again, the order must be passed within 24 months from the end of the assessment year. However, show cause notice need not be given in best judgment assessment if the assessee has defaulted for 142.1. That is, the assessing officer has asked him to furnish some returns, asked him to furnish accounts, asked him to furnish information. If the assessee defaults over there, then the assessing officer can directly conduct a best judgment assessment. Okay, so I gave you a brief gist of summary assessment, regular assessment, and best judgment assessment. Please keep in mind, summary assessment is always without inquiry. A regular or a scrutiny assessment is with inquiry. Best judgment assessment is also with inquiry. And also I mentioned where the show cause notice need not be issued. Now in the next session we'll be covering income escaping assessment, that is section 147. So this section will span from 147 to 152. Also I think for the future lectures I'm trying to figure a solution where I can extend my lectures more than 15 minutes. So as soon as we end this chapter, we will be covering the practice manual as well. If the students want sums from Vinod Gupta, you can leave a comment in the comment section and I'll cover them. But that will be too strenuous because I'm lecturing, then I'll be reading the practice manual. And Vinod Gupta, ideally you should study yourself at home. That would be better. Do all the sums, all the practical problems, all the case laws. And the next section I'll be covering income escaping assessment and other relevant provisions. Hope you enjoyed this session. Hope you understood. If there are any doubts, please email me at bhagatmakhijani@gmail.com. Thank you for viewing.